In the place before time, in a space before place, when the world was nothing, there was wanting, and the wanting of nothing was something, and so it came to be. What will it be? It was pathetic to have to kneel, but desperation buckled her knee to genuflect before him. His court was a primitive space. A cascading wall of water curtained the cavern's gaping maw. Scaling the slick black rocks felt like being swallowed into a saliva-slicked gullet. The crash of the current outside echoed through the tunnel, loaning to the belly of the mountain an illusory rumble of hunger. Only in clenching her eyes against the distraction of the din could she discern his question. "What will it be?" the boy asked again. He was prepubescent and a head and a half her inferior, but carried himself with a posture audacious enough to attempt intercepting her approach. His sparse dress revealed his build, soft from a catered life. The soles of his feet, calloused from meandering in the cave, were his toughest feature. She could rend him with her bare hands had the moment required. Tawesh, exalted mystic, him which hears, Taumei, the tyrant near, is humble. From the darkened recess behind the boy, a guffaw was stifled. Nir's lips pursed and gaze pinched, but criticizing the condescension would earn her nothing. She took a deep breath to quiet her contempt. "I honor the bond between us with gifts of alien fruit and flowers from distant gardens safe from the Fae. Honor me with answers," she bargained. The coals blazed to life as the boy pitched a palm's worth of incense into the brazier at his side. To this light, the darkness surrendered details once obscured in the cavern's depths. Faunal inscriptions frolicked across the broad face of a megalithic dais. Enthroned above was a bundle of coarsely woven fabric, almost as dark as the cavern walls. Folded within was the druid mystic. The light from the fire beat bright against the exposed patch of his pale, leathery skin. A spindly arm, tattooed with a paisley pattern, reached out, but stalled mid-stroke to touch nothing but empty air. "I am hungry," the tyrant Nir explained, "always and insatiably hungry." The mystic's dry, withered lips unfolded as the degenerated jaw pried open. After a heaving, hoarse intake, the reply began. The language was as foreign as the song of morning birds. Guttural tones shifted pitch arrhythmically and cracked whenever the voice too closely approached the note hidden between the modal and the falsetto. The droning voice was accented with clicks and clacks of tongue against teeth and palate, but failed to provide any more meaning. The tread of each passing moment wore thin Nir's veneer of patience. The breath she once held to quell her frustration now quaked through her clenched teeth as a growing snarl. But before the eruption interrupted, the boy caught Nir by her shoulder and pressed her back into place. This audacity earned him a swat, but he was too agile. Twice thwarted, Nir turned the full attention of her fury on the boy. He did not shirk. He failed even to notice her. His gaze was set so firmly behind Nir that she was unnerved. Had he seen something she had not? She turned, certain to find some surreptitious attack. Instead, there was only the hollowness of the cave, slowly filling with the echo of the boy's translation. Taumei Nir, Tawesh black magic, from which all life is sprung. Living is moments, and moments are always, and always is the Tawesh. There was a moment where she was permitted, in spite of her blindness, deafness, and numbness, to moments too dull, dark, quiet, silent, to taste, hear, touch, smell, and see the dark deity. Compared to each other, moment to moment, she measures the worth of her life, and suddenly salient, realizes nothing will ever again satisfy. Dissatisfaction inhabits her belly, incarnate it eats her alive, and even when it's past, the stain will still be there, in mother and daughter alike. For every hunger and with crown descended, 4 more such hungers are bred. Thus Tawesh commanded, divine right assigned, until the very end. The boy's vacant gaze turned accusingly on the kneeling Nir. "By Orkhan's pity, what have you done?" Nir had, her entire life, been applauded for the chaos she inspired. She had long accepted herself as an agent of change, and tore down the walls of expectations with which others attempted to pen her. Why should that garden hedge have been any different? She was a simple creature. The world and its people were a means to an end. Those who could accept their role as her crutch could find a comfortable, fat living in her service. Those who could not stand this hypocritical expectation would not stand. They were walls, and Near would raise them as easily as she had any prior barrier. Whom could have taught her the difference between berry and briar? When had there been a moment to learn that lesson? The island continent, Escambreco, was rimmed by a tall mountain range. The peaks herded the clouds to nurse the forests in the foothills, and in turn the game and folk who lived there. The vast interior, guarded by the mountains, had, however, been forgotten by the rains, and the sorrow of this abandonment cracked the soil to its core. When Near had first seen where the dunes shored the exposed rock of the desert's plateau, she laughed for at last understanding a decades-old comment from a seafaring pilgrim whose path she had crossed. The Vorsan Desert was the most considerate sea. Like the cresting waves in open water, epiphanies lasted only a moment. The pilgrim had become addicted to epiphanies and mourned their constant passing. The Vorsan Desert was a sea of rock, with solid waves sealed against time. It promised a state of perpetual epiphany, a state Near's tribe referred to as a place, the Demon's Desert. Despite her admiration of his ambition, she had no use for his mythology. It was the conquest of the world which had required her survey of that hedge. She had rendered subject every tribe and village in the foothills until the continent's entire perimeter had become her domain. Rebels earned exile in the desert, where winds swept away their desiccated remains. Mortal fear did not smother the brooding of malcontents, however, as they had found new solace in a rumor of an oasis, safe from Near's tyranny. Near did not need to know the size or origin of this rumor. She only needed to raise the hope away from her enemies. She had charged her army across the barren flatland, defended against dissidents with commands more abrasive than the blowing sand. Her rally had driven an army to the brink of delirium before it was spotted. A dark patch of land in the distance, a blot in the otherwise blinding white waste. They arrived at the hedgerow. Blades engaged the branches. Too rubbery to be cleanly cut, the thicket whipped briars in riposte. Barbs latched into and gashed the soldiers' leather garments. The soldiers hacked at the growth. The vegetation hacked in its death throes. Despite the implausibility of that wall's existence, Near tore it down. What had she found in the garden beyond the hedgerow? The delineation between where Near was and where Near went could not be measured either by distance or time. There was no moment of breaking, only two moments, before and after. Before, the hedge was a wall that penned her out. After, it was a wall that penned her in. And it was only after she peered within that she realized how and by what she was trapped. I learned, Near muttered to herself. It was a moment of introspection, utterly out of her character, and its performance cost her what felt like an exhaustive eternity. The ferocity which she before had wielded at the Druid boy had melted into a whispered ramble. We entered the south garden. There was a swamp and flowers. But she could not articulate how the sunlight refracted off of the marsh's waters, or the experiment in colors and perfume performed by the floral spikes. It was myriad, opiate, and not wind but music which rustled the leaves and lapped the water. Flowers, they gave birth to stars. At this, the Druid boy's face twisted with confusion and scorn. It is as I say, Near shrieked at his derision, but too recognized the incoherence of her blubbering. The stars hung so low in the air, and they swam against the current of the music, into and out of the mountain of darkness. A shard of the blackest obsidian jutted from some subterranean vein. It was pocked and hollowed by channels and chambers, and where the walls were thin, the floating flecks of light could be seen whisking about within, pulsing almost lifelike. At the denser portions, however, the obsidian walls grew opaque and reflective, and all the colors the garden attempted to loan the shard were cast back. The hues slid across the surface, but could never stain the black. It had a kind of darkness in which light existed, not the kind which existed only in light's absence. Near had stood at the base of the peak, had admired her reflection in its polish. Her mirror was a pale ghost against a black backdrop. No matter how tightly she pressed her nose to the surface, her colors could not overcome the pitch of that obsidian. Her color was insufficient, and notably alone. That close to the stone she could make out none of the rest of the garden. Only her visage in the darkness, with nothing to fight against, nothing to pen her in, nothing to tear down. She could reach forever in every direction and never find anything. She had, however, defined herself as an agent of change, had to break something. How she defined herself was all that there was. The demon's desert, the boy recognized. Orkhan's pity be with you. This comment drew Near back from her memory. The demon's desert was mythology, and to bridge the gap between the potential and actual was black magic. In spite of her blindness, her deafness and numbness, the druid boy repeated, to moments too dull, dark, quiet, silent, to taste, hear, touch, smell, and see the dark deity. Near's eyes could grow no wider, nor her ears more patient. She would accept any clue if it would rescue her from this peril. Suddenly salient, she realizes nothing will ever again satisfy. Dissatisfaction inhabits her belly. At this, the boy broke from his stanza. You are pregnant. Near clutched doubtful at her waist. Incarnate, it eats her alive. And even when it's past, the stain will still be there. She had tried to remember the rest of the translation, but suddenly doubted she wanted to. It was no matter. The druid boy closed the verse for her, in mother and daughter alike. Whatever this is, she will bear it as well? Near's gaze narrowed accusingly at the boy. He turned to the ancient patrons stationed on the recessed dais. The old man was lost in his own giddy delusion when he giggled. Curses. The difference between that garden's hedge and Near's other conquered walls was the definition of in and out. Before breaking through that hedge, Near was defined by her confidence and resolution. Near was in control. After, she was neither confident nor resolute. After, Near was out of control. Every decision was haunted by the echo of 1,000 unspoken alternatives, which she could see all playing out simultaneously, and, despite their respective shortcomings, she still had to nominate one and acquiesce to the loss of all the others. Near, whose commands had once burned hotter than the desert winds, now cowered to her own precious and lauded capacity. The burden of a broken definition was not hers alone to bear. Every raider whom had pillaged the garden with her now found their minds to be constantly blossoming with a range of possibilities. Memories cycled back on themselves. They reflected on their reflections, realizing and changing, then realizing and changing again. The burden evolved into an opportunity, then decocted into insight. At some still petulant moment, they weaponized and accosted with it. At a next curious moment, they played with it. At yet another moment, they realized they had it. Creativity. They had magic. The magic was limited. It could not alter what was already defined. Altering the definition would require changing that which defined, that to whom all are Tao Mei, less than. It would require changing the mind of the dark deity. That would render the actual back into mere potential. That would be black magic. Thus Taoish commanded, divine right assigned until the very end. Near's changing definition was too muddled to die off, and she was permitted the horror of almost half a millennium to muddle over the last line of the curse. As prescribed, every century found her burdened with birth, and every daughter burdened just the same. Generation after generation was defined by 4 siblings, each separated by a century and their respective divinely inspired ambitions. Near's family grew like a new definition, slow and steady, pieced and patched until it could be used in turn. Only then was Near defined as mother enough, ruler enough, that death could at last begin to find her again. Nir's ancient body was folded within a bundle of coarsely woven fabric, almost as dark as cavern walls. The light from the fire by which she sat beat bright against the exposed patches of her pale, leathery skin. Her spindly arm, which had atrophied years after she had retired her father's sword, reached out. Her hands, like spiders, were little more than long, thin bones segmented by gnarled knuckles. She traced her fingers across the soft, warm lump writhing in her lap, petted the contours in an attempt to define her great-great-granddaughter. The baby, still hot from her mother's womb, took the finger to suckle. Nir could almost feel the saliva, could almost feel the content of the baby's sleep, could almost feel the guilt for having cursed this one just as she had all of her daughters. Her purple eyes slid sleepily shut. She could almost feel, but only almost.